What would you define as the top goal of the Poverty Forum?
One of the main goals of the Poverty Forum was to call attention to the needs of the poor in a time of economic downturn, where sometimes the poor get forgotten in this process. You hear a lot of talk in our political process about the health of the financial sector. You hear a lot about the middle class, the struggles of the middle class. But sometimes you don't hear quite as much about the needs of the poor, which only intensify in times of economic downturn. They should be at the top of the agenda, not an afterthought. So that was one of the main kind of goals of the Poverty Forum, was to raise the profile of these issues among Democrats and Republicans, conservatives and liberals, in a time of particular stress.
You know, we started this dialogue, Mike and I did, with Jim Wallace probably in the early spring of last year, before the economic, downturn began. And I think Mike's exactly right. I mean, there's a sense right now in which this is more important than we ever anticipated. That, there's a new poor that's beginning to be manifest. Families, the largest increase in homelessness, are obviously from folks that are being displaced, that are actual working families, and they just literally cannot afford their housing options. And so there's a sense in which, the middle class is frankly on the edge of poverty in some ways that they wouldn't have felt they experienced they were a year ago. So I think that's right. Our goal is as well to raise the awareness of this issue as, frankly, part of what should be the vision of both parties and both, frankly, right and left's, ideological offerings in the future.
What message do you hope that you send to Congress with these white papers?
Message. Well, I think first of all, it's that there are solutions that they can pass fairly easily. That in this case, had the agreement of people who, cover a fairly wide breadth of ideological spectrum. So it can be done. This is a very polarized time that we're in right now, and but it's also a definitional time ideologically. And there'll be an exhaustion at some point, and I think there'll be an appetite for some solutions that have been vetted, if you would, ideologically. And so I think offering hope that we've got some that they can take up easily.
This is a time of intense polarization, and we're going to see that polarization on issues like healthcare and environment and other things as we have. The question here is whether we can carve out some safe areas in our public discourse that say, let's come together as people of goodwill, apply creative ideas to helping people in need, leave our partisanship outside the door, because we're going to have those struggles, there's no question. But are there some areas where we can agree? And those are good habits to develop in public life.
And have you gotten support from Republicans, Democrats?
Well, we're starting. I mean, probably about a quarter of the policies are in some way embodied either in the administration's existing offerings, budget, et cetera, or through existing legislation. So in some cases, we may have had some influence on just highlighting those, or we're just in sync with where the policies were heading. But yes, we're right now actually actively meeting with folks on the Hill to raise these avenues for engagement and getting generally good reception. I mean, there isn't inherent resistance to many of these proposals. It's a matter of just elevating them and creating the dynamic where people feel this is good to prioritize. There's a political will. There's a value to kind of move these things forward. So it's what we're doing right now, is raising awareness on the Hill.
And we hope these policies have some appeal, particularly because they are innovative. For example, if you look at the package on the web, there is a significant emphasis on wealth and asset building on the part of the poor, not just benefits on the part of the poor. That to me is a very innovative way to approach a lot of these things. One of the great problems of intergenerational poverty in the United States is a lack of capital, access to capital, lack of personal wealth. People live just based on income, not based on savings. So we looked at interesting ways to encourage and supplement and reward the building of wealth on the part of low-income people in the United States. So that's the kind of thing you hope can get into the broader discussion, primarily because it's a good idea that doesn't fit all the old ideological categories. There are several of these in here that have to do with things like recidivism, the problem of prison populations that are coming back into the community. And what do you do about that when you have hundreds of thousands of people in this cycle, where you want to get people out of that cycle in kind of proactive ways? We deal with issues like AIDS treatment, domestic AIDS, which is a growing problem in the African American community in this package. So some of it is calling attention to creative ideas. Some of it is calling attention to needs that people aren't addressing in our political debate and just need to be highlighted.
Another example of this would be the issue of fatherhood and intact families. You know, we have two proposals at least that deal with this question of strengthening the family relationship, the father relationship, removing disincentives, frankly, for marriage. The earned income tax credit actually creates a disincentive for marriage. We address that issue. We actually encourage that the fatherhood initiative that the previous administration supported, Congress has supported, it's been bipartisan historically, that be fully funded and aggressively pursued. And all indications are the administration's interested in that issue and prioritizing it. It highlighted it recently during Father's Day's kind of annual celebration. Indicates there'll be some opportunities there for kind of right-left cooperation. So there are issues that I think, frankly, the platform of the administration plus the congressional kind of, dispersion of members around the country could actually create a national moment. And fatherhood is one of those, I think, that's really ripe for that right now. Right and left, deeply consequential. 1/3 of poverty kind of issues can be contributed to some form of lack of fatherhood initiative or involvement. It's an amazing variable or factor in terms of poverty issues, and it has to be highlighted. So,
what could other community groups or religious groups do to organize and achieve some similar results in the fight against poverty?
This is focused on federal policy, but of course, rightly so, much policy that affects the poor is state and also local focused. And I'd say at some level in this experiment is a model that should be replicated or could be at state levels. We don't have the resources to do that ourselves, of course, but any faith organization or any nonprofit, frankly, that addresses poverty could take initiative and do a similar project at the state level or even, in a local city. So that would be one thing someone could do locally on this.
I think it would be powerful if you're in Akron, Ohio, or you're somewhere in California, if people had local religious and faith leaders from left and right, including the African American community and evangelical community and the Catholic community in particular, which are profoundly influential political communities in many ways. If they could come together and come up with some local proposals that relate to poverty, that has tremendous influence and power. Community leaders, community officials, they take that quite seriously. And so I think it's an interesting experiment. It shows that the faith community, broadly, liberal and conservative, is both a source of compassion in communities through the direct provision of services. But hopefully they can also be a source of unity in our political system that says, let's prioritize the poor. Let's come up with innovative ideas that violate the categories of left and right, and let's get something done.
That will be the last word. Thank you so much for joining us today on Spotlight.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.